said that the scenarios had to be consistent, but am I right when I say you mean economically consistent? Because I had a feeling that there may well be physiological and ecological limitations which your scenarios, if you project them 50 or 100 years forward, well, they're not going to be consistent.
Well, I thought more, I thought both economical and physical, but then I thought physical in the terms that all things will sum up. I mean, the market will sum up, and fodder that will be grown will be used for animals, and that all the flow, the physical flow, will sum up in a way, and for that purpose you need some kind of model. But your point was...
Yeah, my point was, for example, Peter showed that Swedish farmers today are putting almost exactly the same amount of phosphorus on their lands as is being removed in the harvest. There's a very small difference. Yet you projected a possibility of almost a 40% decrease in the use of phosphorus while maintaining production. To my mind, that is only possible if either you decrease the phosphorus in the harvest or you use up phosphorus that is on the field, lowering the amount of phosphorus on the field, which is not a long-term sustainable way of farming.
I mean, of course, this is. I mean, it's just a figure, 1.17, or for phosphorus. I think what we did in the model was increasing the amount with the same as the yield, and then reducing it. So actually, what happened was that we were in the result of this was the same amount of phosphorus but increasing yields. And how would that happen? Well, we don't know, but it means, of course, that you use manure in a more efficient way. You would use the phosphorus in manure in a more efficient way. There might be other sources for phosphorus. So it just means that there are something happening that makes you purchase less phosphorus. But if we knew when that would happen and in what way, then we didn't have to make guesses on this figure.
But my point was, it seems to me that your models do not take the conservation of matter into account. You are somehow inventing phosphorus in your models, and that means that they are wrong.
Yeah, but there might be other sources of phosphorus that is not used today, that come from
I mean, there may also be other forms of effectiveness for the phosphorus. Since the farm balances are of course quite general, and we know that the theoretical farm balance and the theoretical farm doesn't really exist. So that is always a model problem. The reality looks different, and there are farmers not really following the general recommendations for phosphorus input and so on. So I think there can be quite a lot of effectiveness still being made higher in phosphor balances.
Yeah, and you can of course use phosphorus that is already in the ground for quite some time, but eventually you're going to run out, and then you have to supply that phosphorus or you won't get a harvest.
I have 4 more questions. Now you. Oh.
Okay. This sector modeling point of view is a good example of putting things together and produce a big picture. What is the future in terms of supply and demand? And really, I was thinking about this demand side, because you were talking mainly about the prices and the global prices, and they are of course very important. But I would say also domestic demand as such is important. I feel that maybe Danish agriculture is supplying for global markets, but in most other Baltic Sea countries, domestic demand is the driving force. So that most countries are not that competitive, so that they would follow just the global prices in the production. Usually exporting is more expensive than supplying for domestic. so that this domestic demand point of view could be there as well, in addition to this global prices. What has happened in many countries is that the increasing demand of wheat is followed by increasing supply domestically, or some part is imported. Yeah, but basically a longer term modeling would include some demand issues. Would the vegetarian diet become more common, or would it be beneficial for the environment or land use, etc.? We could use these models, but somehow I missed this demand side on your presentation. But rather this longer term economic modeling is not very popular because there are many moving or changing issues at the same time. But anyway, I agree that this is a very good way of seeing the big picture.
Yeah, I believe for some products, I'm certain that there might be a price differentiation between what the national consumers pay and what others pay, and if that increases, then we would have this situation that is important. But I'm not sure. I'm sure it's not for cereals. I don't think we have anything like that. It's the world market price. It doesn't matter if the local market, if the national market. But for beef, I'm not sure either, because in Sweden the consumption increased and import took this. So the farmers wouldn't notice very much of this unless there is specific preferences for national production, and the demand would be large enough that prices would go up, then it would have an effect. But for some products, and we have a bit of that in the model too, actually, for milk and so on. So we have.
Now, if you repeat your name just before asking your question, then you
Okay. Robert Hall from the Swedish Institute. I was interested in the aspect of global input prices, because you said also Swedish agriculture is more sensitive for input prices than maybe the EU average. And I'm thinking there of energy prices and fertilizer prices, and maybe the connection between energy prices and synthetic fertilizer prices. Because if we have a radical change in those input prices, it's going to affect Swedish productivity, and maybe even that's also reflective of the whole Baltic Sea region, because it's generally highly capitalized agriculture.
I mean, if oil prices would be the driving force for price changes, it would mean product prices would go up and specific inputs would go up too. So that would affect the Swedish agriculture. But again, the product prices is on the world market. That's the most important. And then what I pointed out was that we didn't have statistics for input prices that was relevant for Sweden, and also that prices have gone up at a higher speed in Sweden than in the EU global.
now it's Thomas and then Annika.
Thomas Johansson. Perhaps it's the wrong workshop to take this question up at fishing sector. And Christoph, you're talking about your scenarios, and I don't see how you don't take the fishing harvesting in the water in your scenarios.
Also show that we have an effect on the nutrient budgets. It will have an effect on that.
It will have an effect on the water quality, on the ecosystem.
Yes, of course, but it's a different issue. It's completely manual. You can take out the fish, but maybe in summer times 2 rounds and once showed that this has an impact on the phosphorus budget, but this is very low still. I don't know how the fish can have, in terms of sheer masses, it is orders of magnitudes less if you take fish out of it. Of course, it's an important question, the fishing thing for the ecosystem, of course,
Yes.
and the cascading effect and all these issues. But I think eutrophication here, how we see it, is really the bottom-up approach, what we discuss here.
Now Annika.
Well, I had a comment on that, and that was simply that the effect of fishing on the water quality is likely to go down in the future, not go up, because we are trying to catch more cod in the Baltic. That would mean we're going to catch less sprat and the total amount of fish we're going to take out of the Baltic is going to be less. So we'll leave more of the nutrients in the Baltic. It's not a big effect, as Christoph says, but it's going the wrong direction to solving the problems of the Baltic. And if we, in addition to that, allow the seals to multiply to all levels, they're going to eat a good deal of fish too, and it won't be available for human catch. So that's going to leave even more of the nutrients in the Baltic.
Annika?
Annika Nilsson, Department of Law, Stockholm University. I wonder, may I ask two questions to different participants? Is that okay? In this cross-disciplinary discussion, I would like to take the regulatory perspective and ask, first of all, Peter, this suggestion for the new plan is that one of the goals was to decrease the fear of sanctions. And from a regulatory perspective, the big problem often in environmental law is that there is no fear of sanctions. So people, it's just hypothetical. So there is no incitement to following the regulation. So why do you want to decrease the fear of sanctions?
Now of course we want to decrease the amount of farmers that are breaking the cross compliances. And we do that by trying to simplify the rules and make them more harmonized in between themselves, so the farmers doesn't need to have 10 different dates in their head all the time. Maybe we can kind of cut down the dates between measures that are quite similar and affect the same thing. So we want to lower the thresholds for the farmer to say, could I make another measures, or would that make me have too many things to keep in mind, or can I? So, we believe that there, as it is for now, the general amount of measures per farmer is somewhere between 2 and 2.5 amount of measures that the farmers apply for. And if we can make it easier for them to apply for more and keeping those rules that are connected to them harmonized, maybe they can do 3 or 4 different measures on the farmers instead of fearing that will be too many things and I will be probably slipping some rule in the control.
But simplification and making it easier for compliance is not the same as taking away the threat of sanctions. So I think, but also to Bo, I was very interested in this initial discussion of policy changes and price changes to kind of change productivity and the impact. But then I was wondering, what is it that we should change? Because as I understood, higher productivity is good for the environment, and also lower productivity is good for the environment. And then you said in the middle that business as usual was good for the environment. So what do we want to avoid? What do we want to change? But I don't know.
I mean, low productivity is good for local environment because there will be no production. But that's, I mean, it's not good for a global environment because you will take away production and move it somewhere else. So that's just my point. When you're running the model, you can have an effect on a local problem by removing production. But then again, that would be at a very high cost if you're removing some other problem. So, and also if the prices are high. So that's my point. And about the policy, what I was referring to is, I mean, there's a lot of measures that could be taken. I was referring to the general reform of the common agriculture policy, where we had the large support in the system, which is actually decoupled from production, and not much would happen to production if we took that away, if we reformed it. So it's not so interesting. Before it was linked to production, and a reform would mean that it would reduce production somewhere. But this doesn't happen anymore. I was not referring to the rural development program where we have targeted measures. They are, of course, have an effect, and of course, referring to the general big part of the common agriculture policy.
Yes, only a short comment on that. So we heard all the time here from Wu and also from Peter that of course there are many actions which are taking place, and I think they're really welcome, and we have to work on that. That the high productivity will to lower environmental impacts, the low productivity and impacts. And since 15 years, we see actions and we see measures. But I want to raise only a question, because in the last pollution load combination by Helcom, nitrogen is increasing slightly, it's not decreasing. And very often we have these very short scale, so I'm a large scale person because I have to address the entire Baltic Sea. And many of these studies are a little bit small scale, and of course they show effects, but I think we need really better tools, also on the natural scientific side and also maybe on the agricultural models, on the effects. Sometimes I have a little bit the feeling they are very small models and we know something from streams and so on. They're not relevant for the Baltic, the big rivers are not. This is what we see in the Baltic Sea. And so it is not only to explain, I think, with that it takes, so the overall water residence times in Swedish rivers, because we have a lot of till here, is not like in Poland 30 years. It's maybe 1 to 5 years or something like that. It is not that. So we should see more effects on that. So a little bit, I think, but we have to have in mind that it is not only the bright, shining future I see here. So there's also some still difficulties, I think, there. And there's also lack of knowledge, I think, how to address that.
Short comment. I think there are a lot of difficulties, but I think that we also need to separate what we can affect. And some of the increase might be because of different precipitations and background leakage. So we can't affect everything. But for the things that we have been trying to affect, at least the trend is positive.
Now then, so you're waiting for the
Nancy over there. I'm Dennis Collentine. I had this question, which was, do marine ecologists' agricultural scenarios meet those of agronomists? I mean, this is kind of what we see here, is that when I listen to the three discussions, Christoph, I wonder how much use you have of the two scenario ones, and I wonder from Bo and Petra how much use you have of Christoph's. And I think this is what we need to be looking at partially, is that I see some big differences here between dependency on each other and what we're working with the scenarios. And I think that I would like to have you comments and where you started now, but also from Bo and Petra, do you have any use of what Christoph is showing with his modeling? Your two presentations are relatively independent of Christoph's. Christoph's was fairly dependent on inputs from your two sides. So we have a direction here, and I wonder if this is where we want to go, or I'd like all three to comment on what use you have of each other's driving factors.
Yeah.
And I think you start, maybe you can...
Yeah, maybe I can say. So I did what I said also during my talk. This is a large-scale budget approach. I have no idea about agricultural practice, or some ideas. And of course, I don't know what the farmer can do, what are realistic scenarios. But maybe my job is then together with other natural scientists to really translate it to a Baltic scale. What does it really, what are the implementation for that? What are the time scales for that? If you, for example, have price scenarios, productivity scenarios, what does that mean? And again, I think we are not there with the natural scientific models that we really can address the entire Baltic as such. And this is what I expect. But this, I think, is a challenge. We have actions, and they're really, I think, very good activities and the nitrogen and phosphorus balances in the agricultural sector are more balanced, and it is really, really in a good direction. But I think our job is really to give realistic scenarios. And we need really to make the deal about whatever agricultural practices on the field scale, on the large scale, what matters for the Baltic Sea. And I think this is a challenge, and this is what I expect really from these kind of discussions, both on how we have to develop our models in the future and how we can make this really this scale dependence and the scale issue. I think this is what I expect.
It's a very good point. The easy answer is that I'm an economist. I'm setting the scenario. That's and make some changes, and then I leave it for biologists and others to multiply the different land use with different coefficients for pesticides, nitrogen, whatever we are calculating. But I'm quite sure that if it should be used, this knowledge should be useful. It's important to have a more to work together more to see that what we are, how we are setting the scenario and what the output is relevant for the environmental effect. I'm quite sure about that. But so far, it's a sort of specialization in work. Set the farm sector different scenarios and lead it to others, multiply with different environmental coefficients.
I think that the interlinkage between bigger scale on national level or Baltic scale is really important when we're setting the sectoral goal, for example, which we're doing in the agricultural sector. We need to know how much of the retention and how much measures is going to be needed to be implemented on that sector to have a certain effect on the Baltic Sea. And those kind of interlinks are really important, and how much, if the trends are showing that maybe in the last pollution load compilation is actually going up, then we need to maybe increase the work and doing more, and those kind of discussions on how to go forward and how much have we been doing, and when does what we have done start to show effect. It's also an important thing, because now we've been working in the last 20-25 years with phosphorus and nitrogen, mainly nitrogen, and it's starting to show effect on small scale because of the scale differences. Maybe it takes a long time for agricultural measures to actually show up on national level.
Now I have 6 more questions and 5 minutes, so
Okay.
you first.
Klaus, it's me?
Yeah.
Okay. Klaus is the geology survey of Denmark. I think I picked up from the first presentation, and Denmark is actually using twice as much fertilizers on farmlands than Sweden. Can somebody explain me why? Why is that? I think the geology and the climate, etc., is not that different from the southern part of Sweden and Denmark. Why is there such a large difference in the application of fertilizer?
It was a lot of manure. I think this is a lot of livestock. Isn't it of livestock in Denmark? I think so.
Yes,
There's a little bit more pigs there, I think. Yes.
So it's just to get rid of that, and it does naturally increase the production. Is that the case?
Yeah, but of course, I think these livestock-intensive watersheds, they are the most, of course, dangerous for the Baltic seas, of course. And thanks God, Denmark has not so much water running into the Baltic Sea. Otherwise, it would be really a risk. And this is we see in the Netherlands, for example. And this goes in the North Sea, but the North Sea is flushed within a month, and our system is 30 years. So if we should do such a horror scenario that we have an increased livestock production, of course, then it is very difficult for the Baltic Sea. But I think this is the livestock intensive of watersheds are, of course, where you have a lot of fertilizer manure on the field.
Now, Sindra.
I actually have a follow-up question because you were comparing, the input resources, fertilizers and manure per area unit for the different countries, and somehow I get the impression that low input is good, high input is bad. You have some linear trend there. What if Lithuania here is moving in the direction of Sweden or in Denmark? Okay. At the same time, we also have these surplus calculation, farm gate balances, showing that actually what is not taken out, what is entering into the waters, to the groundwaters or rivers, may not be that high. So let me put it this way. Are you willing to, in the future, to modify, those linear?
Yes, of course. This is why we need the discussions. Yes.
Because do you have that inbuilt in your model when you calculate? In your model?
It is steady state. This is as primitive as that. Yes, if you do that. Yes.
Because these balances exist on the national level and regional level in Sweden, I believe in Denmark, maybe some other countries, but not in a consistent way. So is that something you actually are producing and could sort of calibrate with the results from Swedish statistics and Danish authorities?
So we have worked for these estimates, for example, Latvia, and we have used the DAISY model from Denmark, and I think this is really a field scale model which can aggregate that and calculate based on the statistics, the leaching, so to say. So it is not only a budget approach. We used, I think, a state-of-the-art agricultural leaching model, I think, for these kind of estimates. But of course, in our thinking, this is what we also felt in our bonus projects. Of course, we had to do scenarios, and we feel now as whatever ecologist or as marine scientists, a little bit kind of it is not easy for us to do this kind of scenarios. And of course, we do it too simplistic. I completely agree with you, and that's why we need really advice from your side. What is realistic? What can be done in the specific area? But again, the challenge is there how we scale that up. What matters for the Baltic Sea. And I think we need there both, whatever, we need concepts how to, for the scientific and working teams, but on the other hand also we need a little bit more knowledge about modeling that on a larger scale, I would say.
Now I interrupted you before.
Elizabeth, I wanted to ask you a little bit more, Peter. You showed by the end of your presentation some figures on that you have obtained the expected reduction in some small streams linked to the measures that have been implemented. Was this from the study by Frost Schilmar, or which was the reference for that study? I was just curious.
Yeah, it's the recent study.
Yeah, okay. Mm-hmm. So I think this is the important issue that you have both commented on, the time lag between the measure and when we can observe it.
Yeah.
And yeah, I'm not sure that if we continue to make the same measures in the larger area, it will not be as efficient. It's not. If we can't be convinced that there is a one-to-one relationship between. Well, it depends on where we're doing this measure.
Definitely, it depends on where and what kind of arable proportion there is between arable land and forestry and all kinds of different sources. This is just a study done where the majority of the land is agricultural area. So it's easier to try to follow the trends in those areas.
And also the different catchments might respond very differently with respect to time response.
Okay, we're running out of time, but Siv.
Yes, Siv Eriksdotter, Baltic Stern Secretariat. The Swedish University of Agriculture, they have developed storylines. They have looked at global scenarios and they developed 5 storylines. This is a question to Bo. And I think in almost all of this, maybe even all, it showed up to 2050 that production would move from the south of Europe, Constantin to Europe, to the east and north, both in good and bad scenarios, global scenarios. Have you seen those? What you think of them? Have you taken them into account?
Well, but I guess this was due to climate change.
Climate
so,
change, yes.
Yeah, that's what on the slides I had with 35. It was not your study, but it was this study showing an increase in production in northern part of Europe. But still, this is small compared to a small change in 50 years in other productivity. So we don't know, but still, it's of course it's one important factor.
I think there will be a speech later on this afternoon, Steve. I'm sorry, but we have to cut here and go and eat lunch. And Cindy,